Hello and welcome to Athens Speakout. Today is December 29th, 2015. This is part 353 of our program with Dr. Robert Whealey and Mrs. Lois Whealey. And, excuse me, today we're going to speak about the upcoming 2016 election with Democratic candidates Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. First of all, we're going to go with Mrs. Whealey, a historian, and she is going to give us the background, history, and reason to vote for Mrs. Clinton. Lois?
Thank you, Steve. Right. You know, I grew up in a two-party family. My mother was a Democrat and my stepfather was a Republican. So I'm used to having different people on different sides. And that's the case with the Democratic primary upcoming. Bob is a very committed person for Bernard Sanders, who's a senator from Vermont. And I'm quite committed to Mrs. Hillary Clinton, the wife of the former president, William J. Clinton. And so I'm going to be speaking first, as was mentioned, and we'll talk something about Hillary Clinton and the way I see her background and so on, and what might come up in the election upcoming. Of course, there have already been a number of debates, and they'll be having some more debates during the coming year with primary votes in a number of states, and also in Iowa they have, I believe, a caucus, right, where they just decide by neighborhoods, you know, whom they're going to support. I heard on today's radio, as you mentioned, the 29th of December, that today Mrs. Clinton is campaigning in New Hampshire, where they're going to have an early primary, and Senator Sanders is out in Iowa, where they're going to have this caucus sometime, I believe, in January. So, who is Hillary? Who is Hillary Clinton? What's her life background? One of the reasons I'm for Hillary Clinton is that she is a woman who has had quite a lot of political experience in her lifetime, having been First Lady of the state of Arkansas, then First Lady of the United States when her husband was president. She then ran for the Senate from the state of New York and was U.S. Senator from New York for, I believe, 8 years, something like that, and then was Secretary of State for President Obama until early 2013. I have a problem. I spent so much time in the 1900s that I sometimes forget it's 2000s these days. Anyway, she was Secretary of State from 2009 until 2013. And since then, she has, I believe, been working on this book, which is a picture of her as she looks kind of today. I think this is almost entirely about her Secretary of State experience. But it's quite a recent book. It just came out this year, 2015. So
it's entitled Hard Choices?
Hard Choices. And that's what she's saying, that is what happens to candidates. No matter who they are, they're going to be having some hard choices to make. So who is Hillary Clinton? She was born in 1947, in October of 1947. In the state of Illinois. Her father was either he himself came over as a small boy, or perhaps his parents came over from Wales. So his background is actually Welsh. Hugh Rodham is his name, and his wife, Dorothy, Mrs. Rodham, has more of a general European background, not, American mixture, you might say, including, I understand, some Native American involved in Mrs. Dorothy Rodham's background. Hillary was the firstborn child in 1947, and she had 2 younger brothers who, of course, grew up with her. And I have found it very interesting finding out more about Hillary Clinton, preparation for this show, and the fact that she was all along a very good student. She always desired to excel, and she was expected to excel. Her father was particularly adamant about his children doing well, competing, and that sort of thing. And she was a Girl Scout, apparently, and got lots and lots of merit badges as a Girl Scout when she was young. She was raised in a neighborhood, sort of a typical neighborhood, you might say, nice homes, suburbs, north of Chicago. And there were lots of children in the neighborhood. And she was a leader among children. She would organize them to do different things and that kind of thing. She was quite a focused person as a child, and has been as an adult, quite a focused person. Her father was a Republican. The family was Republican in general, and in fact in 1964, when she was a junior in high school, she was a Goldwater Dolly. She went to the convention which nominated Goldwater to be presidential candidate for the Republicans. And so she was a Goldwater Dolly. And when she went to college, she became a leader of the Young Republicans at Wellesley College.
Yes, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. In fact, she didn't become a Democrat, but as a Republican, she became more and more of a liberal Republican, and she was more on the, like Governor Rockefeller, for instance, who was a liberal Republican. She graduated from Wellesley in 1979. And in fact, she was the first speaker. It was the first time they had a student speaker, and she was student speaker as the student body president at Wellesley College. And she had to sort of speak against the main speaker, who was actually an African-American senator from the state of Massachusetts, Mr. Brooke. So she immediately got involved in Washington, D.C. with Marion Wright Edelman, who was the head of a group that is concerned about children.
She attended Yale after Wellesley.
Yes, she did. She went to law school at Yale, and it was there that she met William Jefferson Clinton, who was from Arkansas, who he's a little bit older than she is, and after he finished college, he went to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. And he came back and began at Yale Law School. They met more or less their freshman year and became quite close early on. She worked, interestingly, in Washington, D.C., as I say, for this children's group, was headed by Marion Wright Edelman. And she was actually an intern in 1972 with a quite liberal person in way out in Berkeley, California. And there's an interesting connection there because he was the husband of a well-known English woman, and actually they were both members of the Communist Party. which I'm not sure that she knew at the time
Yeah.
that they were. Troy Haft was his name. But anyway, the woman's side of this couple came to Ohio University and spoke, and I was active and met this woman at the time. And of course her name is escaping me now, which is, I should have it down on pen, but I don't. But she wrote a very interesting book about the American way of death, in which she took on the funeral industry and became Jessica Mitford, that's it, Jessica Mitford. She became quite well known for that. And until I looked in these books about Hillary, I didn't realize that she had ever known Jessica Mitford and so on. Well, after law school, of course, Bill Clinton went back to Arkansas. He wanted to get into politics early on. He was hoping to run for Congress quite early on. He never, in fact, I think maybe he did run, but if he did, he didn't get it. But he did become governor.
Didn't he teach school at Fayetteville?
Well, that could be, yeah, for
I think he
a
did.
while.
I think
yeah.
he taught law school there.
Yeah. But he soon got into politics, and that was always his goal.
I think the first office that he ran for was Attorney General.
Is that right?
Yes,
in
I believe
Arkansas?
it. I believe so,
that
yeah.
could very well be. But what he actually became was governor of
but he actually
Arkansas.
did hold that office of Attorney General
before he went on to bigger things in Arkansas.
Yeah.
And actually, he had 2 terms as governor, but they were split up because he lost his attempt to follow himself as governor, and so he was out of office for a while, and he may have actually done some of the teaching during that time too. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I know less about him than I do about her. She went out and married him in 1975, but they had been together as a committed couple, really, for 4 years by then. And they were married in 1975, and their only child, Chelsea, was born in 1980, which was about the time he became governor the second time, I believe.
I know, Lois, that you know Hillary's story better than I do, but she did work at the Rose Law Firm for a
Yes, she
period of
did.
time.
She was, of course, a lawyer. She finished law school, one of the top people in her law class, and so on, and she worked for the Rose Law Firm in Arkansas. And actually this, who is Hillary, my second point sort of is who are Hillary's enemies? You mentioned the Rose Law Firm, and one of the things that the Clintons discovered, so to speak, to their horror when they got to Washington, D.C. at last in 1993, when Bill became president, was that there were a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who were quite interested in finding out any negative things about the Clintons and making them quite public,
Right.
which of course the Clintons were not too fond of, and a lot of the things were made more of than they really were, you might say. Yeah. But that was one of the things, was her background, not only as a lawyer for Rose Law Firm, but also their investments. One of their investments was with a development company called Whitewater that they were in with another couple.
Morgandy Trust.
And that became very much of a public scandal.
Jim and Susan McDougal.
Yes, the McDougals. And that became very much of a scandal. During the first year, there was one thing after another. One of the first things that they tried to do was to turn on the Washington White House travel agency. And there was some thought, well, maybe we could have some more Arkansans on this, and they aren't doing very good books in terms of their business. They're not keeping very good books and so forth.
Billy Dale, I
Yeah,
believe, was in there.
so
Yeah.
when this came out in May of 1993, and they tried to get rid of 5 of the 7 people who worked, or whatever it was. You know, it was a small group that worked specifically for the White House. I mean, they set up the travel arrangements for the press people and so forth. Well, of course, yeah, that hardly went well with the folks who had the office. That, you know, they didn't want to lose their jobs. They had lots of friends among the press because they had done favors for press people for years.
Referred to it, Lois, as Travelgate.
Yeah,
You remember that?
Travelgate, they called it, because it was the travel office of the White House. So that came out in May of 1993. And one of the problems that they were having, too, was that they had a very close friend who had worked closely with both of them in Arkansas. His name was Vince Foster, and he was sort of Clinton's right-hand man there when they got to Washington. But it was a totally different place. It wasn't Arkansas, which he knew. It was hostile territory, especially after all these press guys got on his case because of Travelgate, you know, that sort of thing. And actually, Vince Foster wasn't working as closely as he once had with Mrs. Clinton. She wanted to work a great deal on issues of health, and she had already started, and Bill Clinton had said, you know, she's my expert, and she's going to lead this effort to get 40 million Americans who don't have health coverage covered. So, you know, she was thinking very much about that and hoping that would get going in the Congress and so forth. And so she wasn't seeing much of Vince Foster anymore, and he was out of his depth and what have you. Anyway, in July of 1993, Vince Foster was found dead in a park in Washington, and it looked like was
Fort
pretty
Marcy
apparent.
Park. Fort Marcy Park.
Fort Marcy Park. It looked like a suicide. He had a gun in his hand. He was shot through the mouth, dead, and so on. And so, of course, here was this terrible incident, and all sorts of things began. You know, they were asking questions. Well, what really happened to Vince Foster? You know, was he assassinated by someone? Did he commit suicide? If so, why? You know, all these things came out about their dear friend and close colleague just 6 months into their first term of office. Okay, so there was that.
If you don't mind me interrupting, Vince Foster came from the Rose Law Firm, and also Webster Hubbell, and he was kind of
right. They were two very close associates of the Clintons from Arkansas who were working in D.C. And Vince Foster died in July of 1993. Well, it was just sort of one darn thing after another, you know. And then one of the things that happened was that Clinton's mother died in January 1994. And this was just about this time that there were beginning to be questions about Hillary Clinton's role with the Travelgate thing. So they had just bad luck and bad things that they did themselves probably, and they also had all these enemies who thought, after people who were sort of, straight up folks like the Reagans and the Bushes, you know. Here's this young couple comes to town. They were just in their 40s at the time. They were quite young. And from Arkansas, you know, hey, these hillbillies, you know, all this kind of thing. There was a lot of prejudice against them. Anyhow, things went from bad to worse for a while. However, in 1996, Clinton was reelected. Now, in the first time he was elected, he was not elected in a majority role because, if you'll recall, that was the election where Ross Perot came in and took 20% of the vote, something like 20% of the vote. And so George Bush, who was the incumbent, the first President Bush, who was the incumbent, got in the 30s something, 37% or something like that. And Clinton won because he didn't have a majority, but he had the plurality. He had 45% or something like that of the vote, and I'm sure Bob will give you the exact figures here in a little while. But this is the kind of thing that happened. Still, in 1996, William Jefferson Clinton was elected to a second term, and Bob Dole, who had been a stalwart Republican leader of the Senate, didn't run a very good campaign and was not elected. Right. So here, all these enemies that they already had in Washington were just, what's going on here? And there was still this, in the background, this Travelgate thing. What were the Rose law firms' checks? What happened to the various things that might have had been a paper trail, and all this kind of thing was going on. So anyway, they began the second term. And in 1997, I think it probably was, there was a young woman named Monica Lewinsky became an intern at the office. Now, Bill Clinton had already had a lot of problems with women, in his past, because although I think he loved his wife very much, he was also quite a womanizer. Men, especially in those days, thought that was perfectly okay. Look at John F. Kennedy. I mean, people think of him as practically a saint, but he had woman after woman, apparently, just like his father, Joe Kennedy. And poor Ted, had that whole problem with the woman who died in his car at Chappaquiddick. And so, anyway, people were out after Bill Clinton for womanizing, and here is this intern, Monica Lewinsky, and it came out, I think she was an intern for about 18 months. She was at the White House for quite some time, and she was giving Bill blowjobs or whatever in the closet, they say, and so forth, and this came out, and what with the Travelgate problems of Mrs. Clinton in the background and so on, he was impeached by the U.S. House of Representatives for lying about sex, not for governmental problems. They were never able to prove that he was corrupt, with the Whitewater or any of these things. They couldn't prove those things. But they got him for perjury about sexual matters. And his wife stood by him. Yeah. Good for her. Good for her. She stood by him. And he was not driven from office because the Senate could not vote 2/3 against him. But he was impeached. So he had a big trial during his second term in office. And in the year 2000, Mrs. Clinton announced that she was going to run for the Senate from New York State, and she did, and she was elected, and she was a senator and did a pretty good job as a senator. And then she decided to run for president.
That's right.
Hillary for president. Hillary for president. This is from 2008, okay?
Yeah.
And what is more, I have a special one here. I don't know whether you can read that, Steve. Can you read this?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
That says Chelsea Clinton on it. That was autographed by the Clinton's daughter when she came here campaigning in 2008 for us.
Now, have you ever been able to see Hillary anywhere? Or
Oh, yes. I've seen her twice right here at Ohio University.
at Ohio University.
She spoke at the Old Baker Center in 1992 for Bill Clinton's campaign.
Yeah.
And she also was a commencement speaker. I
Yeah.
think she got an honorary degree here at OU at one time, maybe 97. I'm not sure when. It was during his presidency.
Yeah.
And I heard her speak there too. Yes, I've heard her speak.
And I could almost bet she'll be coming to town before
Yeah.
now.
Well,
in
let's
November.
hope. Let's hope that
Yeah.
Hillary comes to town. But she became the Secretary of State.
That's right.
And now, who are her enemies? People like the guys who, Benghazi.
Trey Gowdy.
Yeah, Benghazi.
Yeah.
Unfortunate, I mean, it was a terrible thing, but after the Arab Spring, what happens? They came back.
Mm-hmm.
They came, they had civil war, essentially, in Libya, and the American ambassador there was killed, and two other, well,
Chris
another
Stevens.
person with him was killed, and then two other State Department officials were also killed in Libya at the same time.
Chris Stevens.
So the Republicans have never given up on that.
Right, right.
And they've never given up. Now the new thing is her emails. Other people have done the same thing.
Yeah.
The Secretary of State, the black man who was Secretary of State, also used private email. But we
Colin
just
Powell,
hear about
Colin Powell.
Clinton time after time after time after time. Now, she is a very capable person, a very capable woman, a very experienced woman, right from the time she was a Girl Scout
Right.
through today, 2015, and she's been First Lady of Arkansas, First Lady of the United States, a U.S. Senator for 8 years, and Secretary of State for 4 years, and I believe that she has the goods to be an excellent President of the United States.
Thank you, Lois. That was a fine presentation. We're going to take a station break right now. You're watching ACTV Channel 9 in Athens, Ohio. And the next speaker is going to be the esteemed Dr. Robert Whealey, and he is going to tell us a little bit about Bernard Sanders, or better known as Bernie Sanders. And I'm sure he's going to make a good case here too. So, Robert?
Okay, the first question is, why do I support Bernie Sanders? Well, he was born in Brooklyn, New York, Jewish background, went to the University of Chicago where he got a BA. About 1968, at the height of the civil rights movement, and he did a lot of university campaigning for Martin Luther King and black rights as a college student, because the Jews were pioneers in integrating blacks into American society as early as 1910. They have been on the forefront of the civil rights movement. And I have read many of his speeches, and I can see that he probably majored in history or political science or sociology, and he undoubtedly had courses in all three. He supported Martin Luther King, and his brother was a lawyer. His brother was older, and his brother helped put Bernie through college because his father was born in Poland, his mother was born in Poland, and they were first-generation Americans, and his father was a paint salesman, so he came up from the grassroots, so to speak, but his brother kind of subsidized him, and this is why this is why Bernie knows a lot about the law. Mm-hmm. He knows as much about the law, I think, that he suddenly comes up with a lot of legal stuff, like have to follow the Constitution. The United States has failed in having illegal wars pursued by Truman, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, and the worst of all, was George W. Bush, wars without end. So anyway,
I got a question for you before you
go
go
ahead.
on.
Yeah.
Who influenced Bernie Sanders, do you think, as far as politics was concerned? What made him decide that was his degree from University of Chicago was in what?
I'm not sure of that. It was definitely in social science. It might have been in sociology.
And perhaps political science,
Maybe
too.
political science, and maybe history. But he certainly
It's a
understands.
very prestigious school.
He certainly understands the issues facing the American people from the grassroots point of view.
And so, did he then go back to Vermont? When did he?
Well,
go
he
to
goes to Vermont. because-
Burlington, I think it was.
Well, in other words, there are too many Jews in Brooklyn. There are too many Jews in Chicago. How is this unknown working class, middle class, aspiring politician get a foothold? So he goes to Vermont, which is the most white Anglo-Saxon state in the United States. And he settles in Burlington, the major city. And he runs on ecology. He runs for cleaning up Lake Champlain. And he runs from an independent socialist party against both the Democrats and Republicans. Nobody thought he could win. But through hard work, he ran 2 or 3 times to be the mayor of Burlington, and he won. Because the others got involved in. But his big issue is corruption. The problem with the Democratic Party and the Republican Party is that they are financed by big business, big banks.
I just had my producer tell me that political science is what Bernie majored in.
Well, that's information that I didn't pick up. He was pretty smart in
we know now,
picking
so.
that up. I've been just following the reports on the press, and they've been a little bit obscure about that. But political science is a well-known discipline in understanding the meaning of war and peace. And so anyway, Burlington, by the way, is the largest city in Vermont, and it's the major population. And he ran then from the mayor's office as the House of Representatives in 1988, at the time that George Herbert Walker Bush beat Dukakis in the presidential campaign. And then he became senator later on. And he's not as smart as Henry Kissinger, but as a Jew, he certainly understands how the United States bungled into 3 wars. And now Henry Kissinger, on the other hand, was the best national security agent the United States ever had, because the office was only created in 1947, but all of the others have been relatively minor bureaucrats. But Kissinger really made the National Security Advisor head of the Nixon administration, and then he became Secretary of State. And Kissinger's great understanding is the nature of the balance of power. And I'm sure that Sanders followed Kissinger's career very closely. So anyway, the second best Secretary of State was Kissinger. The first was John Quincy Adams, way back in 2016. And Nixon and Ford then were both dominated by this Jewish Secretary of State, in the reasons being that they both failed in Indochina to win any kind of a war. And Kissinger pointed out, ideology is not a foreign policy. You've got to understand the balance of power. You've got to understand the difference between China and the Soviet Union, and Vietnam is a irrelevant third world nation. There's no money in there of great wealth, and who controls Hanoi or Saigon is of minor significance. It's not going to be a great power. So get out of that and focus on China and Russia and end the arms race. So Kissinger's been a great Secretary of State. So I like Kissinger and I like Sanders because they know something of the flaws of Johnson and Nixon, who lost wars in Indochina. And they know why George W. Bush failed in Iraq and Iran. 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq. And George W. Bush doesn't know anything about Middle East countries. Now, the Jews know foreign relations. And when the Israelis settled in Israel, they studied Islamic history, and they probably infiltrated a lot of Islamic...
Robert, I got a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why don't you think that George W. Bush, why didn't he use Lee Hamilton and James Baker more?
Well,
remember, we did a program called the Iraq Study Group
Yeah.
report.
Yes, we did. Fine.
But
I'm not too sure what you're getting at.
well, you were talking about how Kissinger,
Yeah.
who was very knowledgeable about those foreign relations.
Right.
Baker and Hamilton both were very knowledgeable.
Well, no,
too.
they were relatively on the sidelines. They were appointed as neutral investigators of who caused 9/11.
In that particular instance, but I'm talking about they also were not. That's the reason they were appointed, because they were knowledgeable.
Yeah, there was Governor Keene of New Jersey, a liberal Republican, and Lee Hamilton was a Indiana congressman who served in the Foreign Relations Committee. So they were known as honest investigators.
Yeah.
And they were supposed to find out, was there conspiracy to blow up, was it an inside job?
Yeah.
Did Cheney know that the terrorists were coming?
Yeah.
Because it's rather strange that there were 17 intelligence agencies and not one of them could spot the coming airliners. And those airliners, those Arabs from Saudi Arabia, 19 of them were Saudis. And they trained in American airports, practiced this thing, and they pulled the wool over the stupidity of American intelligence system. American intelligence system is based on computers.
Right.
And the Arabs say, we're smarter than that.
Yeah.
We just go there personally.
Yeah. All right. I don't want you to get off
So anyway,
the subject here, but
anyway,
the topic.
I don't think that the investigation of Hamilton and Keene discovered the full depth of why the United States was caught napping in 2001.
Yeah.
And what came out of 2001 was Bush then decides to retaliate and go into Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And he couldn't find bin Laden. He
Weapons
didn't know
of
who the
mass
Taliban
destruction.
were. It was a war chasing American Indians. The real problem of the Middle East is that they are dozens of tribes. So it's like fighting the Blackfeet and the Sioux and so forth. They don't know one Indian from the other. They don't know they don't know the difference between a Shia and a Taliban and a Sunni.
Yeah.
You have to have a lot of history and study a lot of history to find out what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So
you don't think that Bernie Sanders would make that mistake?
well, Bernie Sanders knows enough to keep out.
Right.
And he's saying, we don't want another 30-year war in the Middle East. Now, these Republicans running for president, what do they want to do about it? What do they know about the Middle East? They hardly know a thing.
Yeah.
They just can't. In other words, the problem with the Republican Party is they're more interested in the money. They're interested in the oil. Well, if oil is their major interest and profits are their major interest, you don't have to know anything about it. You can always hire a terrorist. So they hired one terrorist to fight the other. They hired Iraqis to fight the Iranians. They hire Iranians to fight the Iraqis.
Okay.
And as long as Muslims kill Muslims, they think America wins.
Yeah,
No, I don't believe that. I think they recruit more terrorists.
Okay.
And the United States has a tough future in the Middle East.
Yeah, let's get back on topic.
Okay,
You're
well,
gonna-
this is the topic. Bernie Sanders is more informed about foreign policy than any of the Republican candidates. That's my reason for supporting Bernie Sanders. Now, even though Hillary was Secretary of State, she didn't do such a good job as Secretary of State. She bungles into Libya. Why did they expand the war into Libya? Did they know why did they overthrow Gaddafi? What did they do? They overthrew Gaddafi, 19 terrorist organizations there. Nobody knows what the Libyans are going to do. They just become recruits. Why do they want to overthrow Assad in Syria? How is that going to help the United States? It keeps the Middle East boiling.
Yeah.
But I think the United States needs a foreign policy. So anyway, Hillary says we can handle this. Yeah, well, I have my doubts about Hillary. Bill Clinton was not a great foreign policy expert. He got bogged down in the civil war in Yugoslavia. I don't think he knows the difference between a Serb and a Croat and an Albanian, and what are they doing? The real reason why they went in there was an oil pipeline. They wanted to control the oil coming from Georgia through the Black Sea to Albania up into Europe. Oil was the real reason why they intervened, not ethnic cleansing. That's a lot of propaganda. The Croats and the Serbs and the Slovenians were all ethnic cleansing. They were all guilty of the same thing. That's been a historic fight going back to the 1300s.
Well, didn't they say Milosevic was...
They made Milosevic the sole guilt.
yeah.
But Franco Tuzman was also into ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
My ethnic cleansing is more guilty than yours. You know that's propaganda.
Yeah.
That's not foreign policy. Now Kissinger gave Clinton advice. Don't go in there. What are you going to get out of there? He was for a passive foreign policy in there. You're not going to gain anything by overthrowing Tito and overthrowing the socialists of. You just made more enemies. The Serbs are the enemy, and the Russians will continue to be an enemy. The United States has won the so-called anti-communist war. Soviet Union collapsed. Communism is gone. So why do they want to diddle around in Ukraine for? They got enough wars on their plate. Let's finish up with Afghanistan and Iraq before you take on more. Well, anyway, I think that the Republicans don't have a good substitute for foreign policy. Anyway, I think that Burns...
I always look for who's being funded by defense contractors.
Okay, well, should I go on to a second point?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. I want to go back to this problem of war. Why did Truman and Eisenhower accept a truce in Korea during the Korean War in 1953? Now, both Eisenhower and Truman...
Excuse me, Rob. I think Lois maybe wanted to speak about...
Right, Bob, please, let's talk about Sanders. What else?
Sanders understands more about American foreign policy and war, and he has a better historical understanding. And the stalemate in Korea leads to the anti-communist crusade, and that led to the Indochina War. That was that's what the wrong lesson learned from Korea. Is that it was an anti-communist war. No, they should have been satisfied with a truce. Take Korea off the table. It was a blunder. Stalin knew it was a blunder. Mao Zedong knew it was a blunder. And eventually, Eisenhower agrees to settle a truce and fire Douglas MacArthur, who wanted to continue the anti-communist crusade, and settle for a truce. It was a status quo antebellum.
I agree with that, but let's talk some more about Sanders.
Okay.
Specifically, Sanders.
Yeah.
Okay. You've got 12 minutes or so.
Well, okay. I've said enough about anti-communism, I guess. And both Sanders and Hillary, and both Sanders and Kissinger understand that to win the war, you have to win it with 4 factors or 4 doors: the political door, the military door, the ideological door, and the economic means. And the anti-communist crusade thinks it can all be done with ideology, and you don't need any strategy.
Yeah.
I think that Sanders has a modest strategy, and I think he understands the positive features of. You see, the Israelis have had a lot of problems with the balance of power. Mm-hmm. They always know that Israel's on the firing line between 4 great powers of the Middle East: Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. Mm-hmm. The Egyptians have 99 million people. Do you think that the Israelis can win in the Middle East without American subsidization and arms? No, Israel is the elephant in the living room. And Sanders is not a neoconservative. The neoconservatives are American Jews whose heart is on the side of Israel.
Yeah.
And I say the American Jews should put America
Do you have
first.
any idea what Bernie Sanders thinks of Netanyahu?
He didn't go to his speech. He boycotted it. That's one of the points. Now the Republicans, Boehner, McConnell, they all think they can get the Jewish vote by...
Well, they invited him over
Yeah,
here.
they invited him. But they're naive. I think the average Jew is smarter than the Republican. They said this is just propaganda. Netanyahu is coming over here for money. That's why he's coming over here. And are you going to keep giving money to AIP, the American-Israeli Pact? No, I think Obama has done a little better than Bush. He's gone to Israel and said, we're running out of money. You got to cool it. You got to make a compromise of some kind to the Palestinians.
Yeah.
And I think Hillary will go along with a 2-state solution, won't she?
Probably.
Yeah. The only point is, I think Hillary's on a slippery slope. And because of the contributions, she may backtrack a little bit from the 2-state.
You know, that's an interesting thing about Citizens United. You know where Citizens United came from, Bob? Citizens United came from the film that they made. They made a propaganda film against Hillary during the 2008 campaign.
Hillary, the movie,
and
I
she,
think
they got it stopped because it supposedly was too close to the election. It was against the campaign election things. Citizens United was because of Hillary Clinton.
No, it was because of a law passed by Congress called there was a bill to regulate elections,
Right.
and that was passed by a Republican and a Democrat. It was McCain-Feingold.
Feingold,
Yeah.
right. McCain-Feingold.
And that was intensive regulation of what could be said. It was regulation of free speech.
Well, it coincided. Now,
Yeah.
that movie is on YouTube.
Yeah, I
Is
know
it
it's on.
really?
I know it. But the real disaster is the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court forgets about Hillary, forgets about the immediate issue, and goes into campaign finance, going way back to 1907.
Right, and repealing them.
Repealing it.
What Teddy Roosevelt
Yeah,
did.
and now we have PACs, and I think that Bernie Sanders came out for repealing Citizens United Supreme Court decision before Hillary did. Now Hillary is saying she too will go along with repealing the Citizens United.
Well, especially when it was an attack on her that became the whole case before the Supreme Court.
That was one issue.
Well, yes, but that was specifically what the Supreme Court
The more important
was
issue
doing.
was not the personality, but the money. Who's got the money?
Yeah,
Follow the money.
follow the money.
What is necessary to win? There was a senator from Arkansas. You need 3 things. The first one is money. The second one is money. The third one is money.
Alas.
Jeb Bush is the favorite to win. So one of the objections they have to Sanders, the Democrats say, well, Sanders can't win. Hillary has a better chance. She's more electable. Well, if you think that way, Sanders may well lose in the primary. But then Jeb Bush can over-Trump Hillary Clinton because he's got unlimited money from the Koch brothers, from Adelson, and all of these lobbies. Unless we could control campaign finance, democracy is getting weaker and weaker in every campaign. So I think I'll vote for a. He may lose. McGovern lost. Senator Fulbright lost.
Eventually.
Yes, they lost, but the right man sometimes win in the future.
Well, let's hope that the right woman wins occasionally,
Yeah.
too.
Okay.
And I'd say Hillary's the right woman.
I don't have any objections to a woman running for president. I just think that Bernie knows more about the ins and outs of Middle East politics than Hillary.
Tell us a little more about it. You got about 5 minutes. And
Okay. Well, I guess we'll go to I think we'll skip my third question, whatever that was, and we'll go to the fourth point. I think it's the fourth point. My fourth point was going to be, what is Senator Sanders' 2016 economic program? That's good.
Good.
Basically, he's supporting the consumers, the working class, the middle class. He's going back to the New Deal, expand Social Security, raise minimum wage, and he understands the difference between laissez-faire economics and Keynesian economics, and the difference between fascism, socialism, and liberals and conservatives. And most of the American media blur these distinctions, and they are manipulating the electorate. And the mass media are behind the putting capitalist interest and money interest first. And I support Jesus Christ. Man cannot live by bread alone. I support Jesus Christ. It's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than a rich man to go to heaven. Jesus said, what does it profit a man to win the whole world and lose his own soul? And I think America has a problem of losing its soul because big business and banks are putting money first. Interestingly, the big business and banks have a large, predominant Jewish group, but Bernie Sanders is sticking up for the old morality of the Old Testament, because they had a criticism of money. Isaiah and Jeremiah were against money before Jesus Christ became a latter-day prophet. So let me see. The mass media are in bed with the big capitalists and the banks. And Obama is a weak president, but a little bit better than George W. Bush and Cheney, who were really interested. The weapons of mass destruction argument of going into Iraq was a phony excuse. The real reason why they wanted to go in there was to steal oil. But they couldn't steal oil because the oil is owned by international consortiums. It cannot be stolen by military means. Well, I think that we can go on to a fifth question here. What are the major constituents of Sanders? Well, he's going to get the votes of the disenfranchised middle class, who understand that an income tax is better than a sales tax for the poor, and understand that the Wall Street is getting 1% of the income, and 99% of the American people are falling behind, although that's probably an exaggerated figure. I think 15% are making big middle class salaries working for Wall Street. but the top 1% get the profits. So most Christians, unfortunately, have an 18-year-old high school level of understanding and don't grow up as time goes on and learn that Christianity has to be reinterpreted through 20th century science, and we have to have science and philosophy to explain the subtleties of ethics, and that's what.
Okay, Robert. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give Lois 1 minute, and
Okay,
then you're going to get
fine.
a minute.
Thank you,
and
sir.
We'll
Thank you.
wrap the program.
You're doing
up.
a good job.
Right. Well, I think that Hillary could do a better job. I think she's more electable, as you point out, some people claim. And she certainly has the experience and the background. She's a stick-to-it person. Look how she stuck to old Bill Clinton, you know. She keeps on going. She keeps on going. She's got the background to make a great president and to make the first great woman president. So I'm staying with Hillary, and you can have Mr. Sanders.
All right, Robert.
Well, I think that being raised in New York and meeting Jews in high school and going to Bates College and meeting Jews and going to Oxford and meeting Jews, I had about 40 professors, and I would say probably more than 5, but 6 or 7 of them were probably Jewish. And I learned a lot about history and politics and economics. My favorite economist was Paul Samuelson, who wrote the textbook of Keynesian economics. Paul Samuelson was Jewish. Mm-hmm. The leading economists today, Krugman, Robert Reich out in Berkeley,
Right.
Joseph Stiglitz, Columbia. The Jewish economists know where the money is, and they know how money has to be regulated for the benefit of the entire body politic.
So
that
Robert,
includes the capitalists, the middle class, the working class, and everybody should rise up together for a prosperous democratic America.
okay, and you're voting for Bernie Sanders
in the
Okay.
primary.
All right.
If he lasts until Ohio, and if he
Okay.
goes beyond Ohio, I'll wait until he drops out.
Okay.
And then when he drops out, well, I'll have to trim my sails and be satisfied with Hillary as better than any Republican on the scene so far.
Very good. You've been watching ACTV, Channel 9 in Athens, Ohio, and today we've been talking with Dr. Robert Whealey and his fine wife, Lois Whealey, 2 historians, and you got their political views, and perhaps you'll see them again together later when we get into the general election. Okay. Thank you very much for watching.